What's up guys, welcome back to the channel for another warrior guide. This time we're covering everything there is to know about Chulainn. As for next time, that's for you to decide. Be sure to leave your suggestions for what I should cover next. But without further ado, let's jump into the guide. So let's start with an overview of what we're going to cover with the guide. Should you want to skip to a certain section, you can jump to the times listed on screen for specific bits. First up, an overview of Chulainn's basic playstyle. Then we'll cover everything there is to know about his abilities and how to use his kit effectively in your games. After that, items and builds, where I'll discuss my favourite choices for him in terms of items and provide an example build as well. Then we'll cover some specific matchups Chulainn struggles in and also some he does well in for solo lane and how to play in these matchups. And finally, we'll round out the guide with some tips and tricks to up your game on Chulainn. Oh, and quickly before we do start, I might refer to Chulainn as Kuchu or Ku just throughout the guide, because his name is a pain in the ass to say repeatedly over and over. Alright, so Chulainn's basic playstyle. Kuchu is a warrior, as you might already know. This means he's somewhat of a jack of all trades. He's tanky, has decent mobility, good CC, and actually pretty good damage considering he's a warrior. To use him most effectively, you want to be abusing your CC and presence in fights while being insanely hard to kill on top of that, causing chaos and forcing the enemy to deal with you, which creates space for your teammates to clean house. But don't be fooled, a good Chulainn can easily carry a game as well. Chulainn is strong at basically every stage of the game. He bullies lane quite well in solo, so it's quite easy to come out ahead, and he also has a great teamfight presence if you use him right, as he has 8 abilities at his disposal. So now you have the gist of Chulainn, let's cover his abilities in depth. So right off the bat, Kuchu's passive, Berserk, is a complete game changer, and is something you need to be aware of when playing him. It's somewhat of a complex passive, but it's really intuitive once you get to use it, and is really one of the best passives in the entire game when used right. So Chulainn is a massive hipster and doesn't use mana. Instead, he has a rage meter that will fill up on successfully hitting abilities, basic attacks, and taking damage. Once he builds up enough rage to pass his threshold, 85 out of max 100 rage, he transforms into Berserk mode, gaining a new set of abilities, bonus physical power, and a health shield on transforming. He will remain transformed for 20 seconds regardless of his level. And since he doesn't use mana, any mana or MP5 from items he buys will instead convert to health and HP5 respectively at a rate of 15%. So buying 100 mana results in 15 extra health. As you can see, the conversion rate isn't very good, so it's more of a little bonus than something you will build around. As for generating and losing rage, casting any ability will cost a set amount of rage. If you don't have enough rage, you can't cast the ability. Rage will regen like normal mana up to 25, but not past that. Chulainn can gain rage by hitting abilities, gaining a set amount of rage per target he hits. We'll cover more on that later. 1 rage per basic attack he hits, and also 0.5 rage for each instance of damage he takes from any source. Managing this rage so you can transform at key moments is absolutely essential to playing Chulainn well. That's why I spent longer than normal on just explaining his passive, because it's super important. But moving on to his first ability, Barbed Spear or Ground Slam. In normal form, Chulainn launches his spear, doing damage, stunning minions, not gods though, for 2 seconds, and reducing all enemy healing by 50% on hit. This costs 9 rage. In Berserk form, Chulainn slams the ground, doing damage and rooting all enemies for 1 second. In both forms, this does 75 to 315 base damage with 45% scaling, and has a 16 second cooldown scaling down to 12 seconds. So this is a really simple ability. In fact, most of Chulainn's abilities are really simple to compensate for his crazy passive. This will be your main wave clear and poke tool. This is also great for rage generation since the cooldown is fairly low and you can spam it a lot in fights or at minion waves to quickly generate rage. Speaking of this, it grants 5 rage per target hit and 8 for gods up to a max of 18 per ability cast. With the 9 you use to cast the ability, you can effectively gain 9 rage per cast of the ability. Chulainn's 2, Vent Anger, allows him to spew steam around him, granting him a small amount of movement speed and giving a damage aura around him that ticks every 0.5 seconds. This has a 6 second duration, costs 16 rage, and has a 6 second cooldown at all ranks. The cooldown only starts once the duration of the ability expires though, so it's effectively 12 seconds between uses. When Berserk, the ability is always active and costs nothing. It's also worth noting that this ability is always available from level 1 in Berserk mode, even if you don't have a point in it. So this is an incredibly basic ability. Of course it's just used for some continuous damage while boxing and in teamfights, and to chase of course with that little bit of extra movement speed. But this ability is really used to delay your Berserk mode if you need to. It seems counterintuitive to not go Berserk, but sometimes you actually want to save the Berserk for a teamfight where it's more useful rather than just Berserking in a lane on your own to clear a wave, for example. Also, if you're about to recall, it wastes the entire Berserk while you run back to lane, so you will want to cast this using 16 rage, which should bring you below the 85 cap to transform and allow you to save the rage mode. Managing your rage like this is a key part of playing Chulainn effectively in fights, so make sure you're doing this. Moving on to Kuchu's third ability, Salmon's Leap or Furious Charge. In regular form, Chulainn leaps forward, damaging enemies in a circular area around him and also in a line in front of him. Just like his 1, this ability generates 5 rage per target hit, 8 for gods, and has a maximum rage generation of 18, costing 9 to use, so you can effectively generate 9 rage per use. In Berserk mode, Chulainn dashes forward, pushing all enemies backwards with him. In both forms, this does 65 to 285 base and 60% scaling in damage and has a 16-second cooldown flat. So in normal form, this ability is great for rage generation. Hitting a full wave will grant you the max of 18 rage, and hitting 2 enemy gods in a fight will give 16 for example. Also, it can of course be used for mobility to chase kills or to run away. Just be careful with this one, as where other gods only use mana to cast their movement ability, you'll use 9 rage for this, so depending on the situation you might not want to use this. For example, if you're coming out of Fountain, that will cost you rage and it's not as easy to get back as mana. Or if you're trying to chase someone in a fight and you're about to go berserk, it might stop you going berserk using the 9 rage for this ability, so you gotta be careful with that. And finally, Chulainn's ultimate, Spear of Mortal Pain or Warcry. In normal form, Chulainn swings his spear around him in a large area, damaging and knocking up every enemy around him, granting 10 rage per target and 16 per god hit. This caps out at a maximum of 36 rage, costing 14 rage to activate. You can effectively generate 22 rage with this ability. In Berserk mode, Chulainn roars and terrifies all enemies around him, dealing damage and trembling enemies for 1 second. In both forms, this ability does 175 up to 475 base and 65% scaling in damage, and it has a 100 second cooldown in normal form and 20 seconds in rage mode. So if you thought generating rage seemed easy before, this ultimate is a great way to get that last bit of rage you need to transform in a team fight. Even hitting just 2 enemy gods with this gives you 32 rage, counting for the 14 it costs, that's 18 rage boost you can get in a team fight. Hitting 3 or more gods will give you the full 22, and you'll often come into a team fight around 60 rage or so ulting 3 people and then casting your 1 will pretty much get you ready to transform and wreak havoc in a team fight. So as you can see, I'm constantly mentioning rage, and that's because it's really something you need to be aware of in fights to make great use of Chulainn. Anyway, in Berserk form, this ability is much simpler, just giving a tremble instead of a knockup. For those who don't know, since it's quite an obscure CC, Tremble is like Kabrakan's 3, it just makes you unable to control your movement effectively. It is worth noting that if you're going to transform back from Berserk mode into normal mode and you haven't used Warcry yet, make sure you do. The cooldown for both ults is separate from each other, so you lose nothing for simply using Warcry at the end, even if it's just to clear a wave. And as for leveling order on Chulainn, it's pretty simple. Level 1 take Barbed Spear, Level 2 Salmon's Leap, Level 3 take a second point in Barbed Spear, Level 4 take Vent Anger, and Level 5 take the ultimate. From there, max the 1, then the ult, then the 3, and finally the 2. You can also delay the 2 and not take it at level 4, but for the most part it's just better to take it when you can. So knowing how Chulainn's kit works is only half of what you need to play him effectively. The other half is your item choices and build paths, so let's cover that now. Alright, so as we've covered, Chulainn is best played as a tank. That of course means he's best building a ton of defense, health, and CDR to survive in fights and spam his abilities. So the natural place to start will be with a starting build. For solo lane, there's a few different viable starts right now depending on how you like to play, and they all have different strengths. So the first build is probably the safest and most reliable start for Chulainn. Not necessarily always the best, but it works pretty well. This start involves getting Warrior's Blessing, tier 1 boots, and a health chalice, with teleport as your relic. This start, as I've mentioned before, is a safe choice. Warrior's Blessing isn't amazing right now, but it does give decent sustain and some defenses in lane. You also have the teleport for a safe recall and TP back to lane, plus you can easily rush Warrior Tabby as you've started it early on. Speaking of Warrior Tabby, the second start is more high risk, high reward, and is a bit aggressive. It's the same as the first start, except you drop the Warrior's Blessing and simply get tier 2 boots, health chalice, and TP. This start is best for an aggressive early game, which is why it works so well on Chulainn. All you need on your first back is 650 gold to finish full Warrior Tabby and get the 40 power. People don't always expect this start, and it can work nicely since blessings for solo are kinda weak right now, so rushing boots is actually a viable start. And finally, you can rush Gladiator's Shield by starting with tier 1 shield, health chalice, and TP. You then only need 1050 gold, which is doable on your first back and you have full Gladiator's Shield. This is definitely my least favourite of the 3 starts though, and I'd only recommend it if you're really good at solo and can play without a blessing early on. It's safer to go for a boots rush most of the time over this. So that's it for starting builds, moving on to the actual items you'll need for your build. So for your boots, as I've briefly mentioned before, Warrior Tabby is the superior choice for Chulainn. He doesn't make good enough use of the attack speed to get ninja, and the other 2 boots sacrifice too much to be viable in solo. The 40 power of Warrior Tabby is too powerful to pass up. Alright, on to the rest of your items. So to kick it off, Gladiator Shield is an extremely good item for Chulainn in the laning phase, and also in team fights. It's cheap, has decent stats, and makes up for Chulainn's lack of innate sustain in his kit. It's extra good for him as well since he effectively has 8 abilities he can use to proc it if he transforms in a fight. Glad Shield is usually my go-to second item against a physical lane opponent, Mystical Mail is not bad either if you get a big lead in lane early on and feel you could afford to grab it, then you can, but the cheaper and safer option is definitely Gladiator Shield. For a magical lane opponent, it's also viable to pick up Gladiator Shield kinda, but it is a bit of a waste of the physical defense on the item, so I usually like to grab something else against a magical laner. Against any kind of healer such as Aphrodite, Chang'e, or magical gods with heavy self-sustain like Sobek or Zhong-Kui, it's definitely worth grabbing a Pestilence early on. It gives you great defense, and of course the passive is really useful once their heals come online. If they don't have any healing but are still magical, I'll usually grab an Anchile or a Runic Shield in place of the Pestilence. After your second item defense, you'll need to adapt your build to the current match and build accordingly to the enemy comp and also your comp. Some good items for the rest of the build would be Hide of the Urchin. This gives a ton of each type of protections along with health that provides a lot of tankiness. The 250 mana is kind of wasted on Chulainn, but at least it converts to about an extra 40 HP. Spirit Robe. This is similar to Hide of the Urchin in that it provides both types of defense, but this one doesn't require stacking. It also provides 10% CDR and some CCR, which are really great for Chulainn, plus the incredibly useful anti-CC passive. Mantle of Discord is like a beefier but more expensive Spirit Robe. 10% CDR, 60 of each protections, and a great passive as a failsafe against being bursted in teamfights. For pure physical defense, Midgardian Mail and Hide of the Nemean Lion are both great options for dealing with hunters or gods like Baka or Kali that use auto attacks a lot. Mystical Mail, as I've mentioned before, is very expensive but risky, but has a huge payoff if you build it early. I would avoid getting this item any later than 3rd slot really, but if you do get a lead early on, it's definitely worth building. Void Shield is a nice option that still provides some defense and health, but also power and 20 penetration, which is really nice for upping your damage versus mages and hunters while not sacrificing too much defenses. Plus you will increase your other physical characters' damage as well using this. There are other physical defense options such as Breastplate of Valor, but for the most part these ones are the best of the bunch. In terms of additional magical defense, there is of course Pestilence, Runic Shield and Anchile as I mentioned before. Bulwark of Hope is a good option if you don't want Pestilence, or even on top of the Pestilence if you really need a lot of magical defense, such as against a double mage comp for example. But that's pretty much it for magical defense. Usually you need less of it than physical, and one item of magical defense is usually enough against most comps, plus some extra from Mantle or Hide of the Urchin or Spirit Robe for example. The final defensive items I like on him are Winged Blade and Witchblade. These provide nice health, movement speed and other useful stats, along with useful passives against slow reliant characters and auto attack reliant characters respectively. And finally, there's a couple more aggressive items that can work for Chulainn if you're ahead and can afford to lose the tankiness to buy them. Most notably will be my Salmone. It gives 50 power, which is a really nice boost since all 8 of your abilities have scaling, plus it has some health and defenses along with that. Plus the movement speed as well to help you stick to targets. It's just got a nice bundle of stats on this item, and if you're going to get anything aggressive, I would go with my Salmone before I go with anything else. That's for solo anyway. If you need to play him in other roles like jungle for example, some more damage items might be warranted, but for solo he works best with just boots and full tank and CDR. In terms of relics for Chulainn, Teleport is usually your go-to first relic. It helps out a ton in the laning phase, and of course you can TP across the map once you've upgraded it. The second relic slot is usually filled with a team fighting relic such as Heavenly Wings, Horrific Emblem or Shell, but you can also pick up a Blink for engaging with a Blink Hole or even Thorns if you feel it's necessary. Alright, so that's about it for items I recommend on Chulainn. Let's go into that full build example. So for solo lane Chulainn, start with Warrior's Blessing, tier 1 boots and a health chalice plus teleport for your relic. Finish your boots into Warrior Tabby, then get Gladiator Shield against a physical or Pestilence against a magical laner, then Hide of the Urchin, Void Shield, Midgardian Mail, Mantle of Discord. This build provides insane defense in fights along with a little bit of CDR and some damage coming from boots and Void Shield. But of course, as always, you need to adapt your build to the current game. If the enemy mage is super underleveled and barely even doing anything to you, you probably don't need more magical defense and can stack physical for example. But yeah, this build should work great for any of you who are new to the god and just need a quick build to get you going. Alright, so with builds out of the way, let's go in depth on some of Chulainn's good and bad matchups in solo and how to play in them. So Chulainn is generally a lane bully, and because of this he has really good matchups against a majority of solo lane gods. Amaterasu is probably one of Chulainn's easiest matchups. She has a really weak early game that Chulainn can really abuse, and has to stand close to the wave to clear, meaning you can build rage off of her and her wave at the same time and also poke her out. As long as you can burn her dash, you're pretty much good to go in terms of killing her. You can use your jump to dodge her ult as well if you save it for that. While you are slightly worse in teamfights, if you come out of lane with a lead, which you should in this matchup, you can easily make more of an impact than she can. It's only really in the hyper late game that Amma starts to outclass Chulainn at all in teamfights. Aphrodite is another free lane type of matchup. Aphro basically has to sit on the tower the entire game or she risks dying to you. You outclear her super hard and can even 2v1 on a gank sometimes if you transform at the right time, since Afro's damage is really weak early on. You have anti-heal built into your kit, and if you grab a Pestilence, that's up to 75% anti-heal, which just destroys her. In this matchup, just shove her to tower, poke where you can, and try to force her ult so your jungler can gank her for free. If she's just sat on the tower and you can't force anything, you want to invade blue so she can't sustain as well, and then proxy her waves to get a lead, make early rotations she can't follow, and snowball the game to a point where she won't be relevant. And finally, for good matchups, Guan Yu is another one where you can bully super hard. Similar to Afro, you have built-in anti-heal which helps, and if you time it right, it's possible to jump his ult or counter-ult him for the CC immunity. In rage form, you can also interrupt his 3, which is a majority of his early damage. Invade his blue wherever you can and just try and shove him to tower and poke him out. Teamfight potential goes to Guan mainly because of his AoE heal, but with enough anti-heal on your team, you can counteract that, and without the heal, Guan is severely weakened in teamfights, and you can outpressure him with your 8 abilities. There are definitely more good matchups for Chulainn in solo, but I don't have time to cover them all. These are just the main 3 that are very in your favour. In terms of bad matchups, there are very few matchups that Chulainn actually loses, since he pressures really well and can trade well early on. One of these such matchups is Hercules though. Herc can pretty much match you in terms of bully potential and always has the threat of bursting you from 60% health with his combo or pulling you under tower early on. He also out-sustains you once he puts a few points into his heal, and while yes you do have anti-heal, even that isn't enough to stop Herc sustaining up. Best advice for this one is to be careful how aggressive you get. If he has Earthbreaker and or Driving Strike up, then keep away from his tower and watch for ganks. If he uses those abilities to clear, you're obviously pretty safe, and actually if he does clear with Driving Strike, that's your chance to get aggressive, especially if you can transform as he uses it and poke him out a ton. Also, try to avoid boxing him with autos early on. While Chulainn's autos are great because he has the extra range and stuff, Herc's passive makes his autos hurt way harder than yours, so be careful with that. Herc's early to mid game is insanely strong since he has mage-like damage while still being tanky. However, once you get to late game teamfights, his damage is less relevant and his CC and zone control is much weaker than Chulainn's, so once you get to teamfights, you should be good to go. Just make sure you don't get killed in lane too much to the point where you never get there. And the other really bad matchup for Chulainn, in my opinion, is Baron. Baron is a tough one, mainly because he's insanely hard to play aggressive into. If you try and dive him, he's got the ridiculous slow and root, and of course he can give you the Zug straight under a tower while also dealing 30% of your health. Once he gets his clear maxed, he clears waves super easily and can also secure his own blue really well over walls, so it's extremely hard to play aggro into him the way you would into an Afro or something like that. Not only that though, he even matches or slightly beats you in terms of late game teamfight presence. The ult is just insane in teamfights, plus the root, heals and speed on his 2, and great damage is really hard to deal with in a teamfight. Best way to win this one is just try and surprise him in the first 1 to 4 levels with a transform and land a kill to snowball the lane. Once he hits 5, you're very unlikely to be able to kill him on your own, and even on a jungle gank he's quite hard to take down. So yeah, best try and land a kill before level 5 if you can, and hope for the best in this one. I'll also quickly mention Achilles. This isn't a really unwinnable matchup by any means, but it is one you have to be careful in. Normally Chulainn just runs the lane and you don't have to worry about it too much, but a good Achilles will stomp your ass in lane, so be careful of that. Once you get to teamfights, he sucks ass though, so just try and stay even in lane for this one and just stomp him in teamfights. Other matchups are generally just neutral or slightly in Chulainn's favour. These few I've pointed out are just some of the very polarised matchups where it's either very easy or very difficult respectively. Alright, so finally let's finish this one up with some synergies and tips and tricks for playing Chulainn well. So the first thing you want to watch out for with Chulainn is how long it takes to transform. You have up to 3 seconds while above 85 rage to transform. This gives you of course the chance to stop the transform if you need to by using up some of your rage, but also if you're relying heavily on that transform in a teamfight, it is going to take 3 seconds before you get there, so time your engage based on that and play around it. I may have mentioned this briefly before, but Chulainn's 1 in normal form will stun minions. This can be useful if you're low and don't want to take minion damage, but also if you want to take a fight or a trade, you'll aggro the enemy wave by doing so, and if you can clip the wave with your 1 as well as the enemy, not only does it build more rage, it also stuns the minions so you take less damage. Make sure you abuse your strong early game on Chulainn. While Kuchu's level 1 is actually very weak, as soon as you hit level 2, you should be pretty close to going berserk, giving you access to effectively 5 abilities plus the passive Hell Shield at level 2. Literally no god in the game can match that, so be sure to take trades early, especially at level 2, and you'll win every time as long as you play it right. This can easily result in a first blood or burning someone's TP early, and you can get a lead from that. This is kinda linked to the previous tip, but don't underestimate your damage on Chulainn. If you're used to other warriors like Amaterasu, Bellona, maybe Wukong, you'll be surprised how much damage you actually do early on as Chulainn, and even later into the game. Having 8 abilities that all do damage is insanely strong, and if used correctly, it can put out more damage than every warrior in the game, and even more than some mages early to mid-game. But that's about it for this guide. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to drop a like and share it around with others who want to learn Chulainn. Let me know who I should cover next, of course. Chulainn was mainly a community selection since a ton of you guys requested a guide for him, so drop a suggestion and it might be the next guide. But that's about it for now. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out, you nerds.